Before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to put a trigger warning at the beginning. We will be talking a little bit about domestic violence, sexual assault, and abuse. So, if that is a conversation that is a bit sore for you at the moment, please go ahead and skip this episode. It'll be completely fine with us. We don't want to bring up any bad memories or anything like that. So, please take care of yourself. And we'll see you next week. But otherwise, please enjoy this episode. Welcome back, agents, to another episode of the Fangirl Files podcast. My name is Madison.
And my name's Sabrina, and today we are going to be discussing toxic characters.
Woo!
One of our favorite topics, as I'm sure most of you are aware by now.
Yeah. I was going to say this relates to the fictional crushes episode, but because we took that down, I was like, no, I can't say that anymore.
Yeah, guys, for those of you who listened to our fictional crushes episode, we had a conversation, and since I'm applying to big girl jobs because I'm graduating in May, and Madison will also soon be doing that within the next year, we came to the conclusion that we don't ever want our former employers to know the way we speak about fictional characters, because if they find out, we will never get hired.
Yeah.
And also, we want to be able to put this podcast on our resume. So that deals with that. So we are really sorry that episode's gone. It's one of our favorites, but it had to be done.
Yeah. We should probably establish the fact, too, we're very tired and hungry right now. So if this episode is crazed, that's why.
Yeah, we don't even know up from down right now. We are both very tired and very hungry and very stressed.
Yes.
So that is that. But we are here, and we're going to have a little chat with everybody
about toxic characters.
We love toxicity. But first, the idea for this episode came from a little story we have to share with you.
Oh, yeah. Get ready.
Oh, yeah.
The introduction of Chicken Little.
The introduction of Chicken Little. I feel like I've mentioned Chicken Little, but I've never addressed him as Chicken Little. So for those of you who remember from our Evermore episode, I went on a whole tangent about Tolerate It, and I talked about this guy who had done me wrong and had made me feel the way that she feels in the song. That's Chicken Little. Basically, Chicken Little, despite my having a boyfriend for the past nearly a year now, will not and does not let me be. Now, I'm perfectly happy being acquaintances with this person. I don't mind. As long as they're not impacting my relationships or whatever, if they just need a quick check-in, somebody to talk to on occasion, whatever. I'm a nice person and I'm here for them, no matter what. However, because that's just how I am with people that I care about, no matter who you are, no matter how long it's been, if I care about you, I'm always going to care. But the thing is this person is a subscriber to the podcast and has only ever heard one episode. And they have been a subscriber to the podcast since the very beginning. So that means when it was just me doing the Caffeinated Artist, that's when they subscribed. And so they don't know the show with Madison and I. But a few weeks ago, I was combing through Spotify and iTunes, as one does, and I decided to see if anyone had left reviews on our podcast. And I came across this one review dated back to early December. And for those of you who don't know, this was during the time when I was deleting all of the old episodes, and we had just released the news that Madison and I would be continuing this show together. And so the review was rather rude. It said, if you want to talk about your life, write a book. And it was just really, really rude and said it was an awful podcast and not worth your time. However, like I said, this review was from a time when my episodes were no longer existent. So it just didn't make sense. And I was like, wow, this person must have just heard the old episodes and came back to have left a mean comment, because it just didn't make any sense. And I kind of wrote it off. But then a few weeks ago, I get a call from Chicken Little. And Chicken Little says to me, hey, remember how you blocked me on most of your social media a few weeks ago. At that point, it's probably a month ago. And I was like, yeah, what about it? And he was like, I got super mad at you. So what I did was I left a really nasty review on your podcast. And mind you, this is the only person that has left a review. So when people go on iTunes and look for our show, that is what they see. And I, at some point when I originally saw the review, had the sick thought in my mind of maybe it's him doing this to me, because I'm probably not going to tell our whole story on the podcast, but it is a very toxic story. But on some level, I thought that it was him doing it to me, and I said, no, he wouldn't do that. There's no reason anymore. It's been years. Who cares? And I found out it was him. And when I say how childish and stupid and honestly just a degenerate piece of crap can you be to go and tear down someone's hard work? Because now it's not just me he's attacking, it's Madison. It's something we're both working very, very hard on.
Yep.
And Madison has met Chicken Little a couple times. She didn't like him. We lived together, for context, for those of you who don't know us very well. And she's met him a couple times. She didn't like him very much. Can't say I fucking blame her. And now he's attacking both of us in our work and something that we are really, really passionate about. So now we wanted to talk about toxicity in characters and how those characters influence us in our everyday life. Because honestly, I spent so much time on this person who isn't worth because of ideals that were put in my head by books and movies that I really, really loved, hoping that this person would change. And that's just not the truth. So that is what brought about the topic of this episode.
Here's the thing, like, you guys don't know a lot of the story, and I was kind of there for like a little bit of it, but from what...
You were there for most of it. You were there like when it started to get really, really, really insane.
Yeah, but some of the things that he said to you, I'm just like, that is not okay.
No. And I took it lying down and I put up with it and I was like, oh, it's okay. I made so many excuses for it.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't have.
I mean, when you're in that situation, you just don't blame yourself for it, because...
Yeah. I don't. Not anymore. But, like, knowing that review was made me sick to my stomach. Or sick to my stomach. I think I just said stick to my stomach, but... it made me sick to my stomach, and I demanded that he take it down because it was just rude. And knowing it was him, I knew that it wasn't factual or anything to do with our podcast. It was just pettiness.
Yeah.
So he has removed it. For those of you who are going to go looking for the review, it's not there. But yeah, it was a very sick thing to do. And thus, the idea for this episode was born. We meant to cover it a couple weeks ago, but we both took solos, then a week off, and then WandaVision.
Yeah, it's been crazy, but I'm excited to talk about it.
I am too. I think this episode has been a long time coming. It's something we've wanted to talk about for a long time.
Yeah, and I kind of did my thesis on like the social learning theory, which is basically like the term for what we're talking about, where like the relationships we see on television, we think that those reflect real life, and so they sort of influence our lives through media.
Alrighty. So I'm going to take you guys very briefly back to the 1990s when a very popular show was there for us.
Oh, da 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 da. So no one told you life was gonna be this way.
It's gonna be this way. Da, 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 da.
Okay. Anyway,
okay. So we all know and love Friends, and we all know and love the iconic couples that came with the show, i.e. Chandler and Monica, Queen and King, and Ross and Rachel. The big one for everybody, myself included, was Ross and Rachel. Because, as Phoebe said, they're each other's lobsters. They mate for life. They're endgame, as the kids say these days. However, and I grew up...
Are you 80? I'm sorry.
Yes. Yes, I am. Anyway.
No!
Anyway. I grew up loving Ross and Rachel. I grew up rooting for them, and, you know, in the final episode, when it's like, okay, but did she get off the plane? And then she did, like,
I got off
made me
the plane.
bawl like a baby.
Yeah.
Like, I got off the plane, and it was like, see, like, it's you and me. There's no more running now. And he's like, yeah, unless we're on a break. Like, you know, like, the whole thing. is just, it was iconic, and you wanted them to win at the end. However, and I've loved Ross my whole life, but when I moved in with Madison, she opened my eyes to something I had never seen before.
Yep.
And that was that Ross Geller is a toxic piece of crap.
Can I just say, here, I actually found out from my sister Peyton, who told me, because when I was watching, I was like, oh, Ross is like this like really nice, like nerdy scientist dude, and he's really misunderstood. And then Peyton pointed out all the stuff that he did that was toxic, and I was like, oh my God. Oh my God.
You're like, I see it now. Yeah, and I see it now too. So thanks, Peyton. You ruined our lives.
She doesn't watch the podcast, so she wouldn't know.
Yeah, I know, but like, I just want to put it out there into the universe.
Fuck you, Peyton.
So that somebody knows.
I'm kidding, I love her.
I started noticing all of the stuff that like he was doing that was toxic. Like, the number one thing I noticed, honestly, was how many relationships Ross had after Rachel, and then she didn't really have any.
Because he kept sabotaging her.
Right, like he had, she had that one angry guy, like, you remember the one Ben Stiller came in and he was angry and he yelled at, like, the chick? Like, the chick and the duck. Yeah, and Ross was like, he's an angry guy, like, and so that didn't work out, and then I don't remember if there were really anyone else that, like, came in and, you know, was with her, other than that Joshua guy, the blonde one, for, like, a brief period of time, and then that ended. And then Tag, like, the young guy, before, like, she and Ross had the baby.
I vaguely remember. Like, that's the problem. I vaguely remember, friends.
And that was it. It was, like, all her relationships, she didn't have nearly as many as he did. And it's, like, even when she did, he was, like, always pissed off about it.
Exactly. Even when he was in a relationship with another person too, like that was just messy. Like, dude, don't try to control her life in that way. You literally are not dating her anymore. Like, you have no right to do that. Just
right. Or like after he like, when they got married in Vegas, and then she wanted a divorce. Or she wanted an annulment, and he didn't do it, so then he had to get divorced because he wanted to, like, stay married to her without even telling her. That is so toxic.
I forgot that happened.
It's so toxic. And I love Ross and Rachel. Like, I love the premise of their relationship being, like, after all this time that they've gotten together, and, like, they've managed to make it worse. But also, Ross did cheat on Rachel. I don't care if you were of the opinion that, they're on a break. That's not valid. Less than 24 hours later is still shitty, especially if you get back together with the person and you don't tell them. And like the fact that she grappled with forgiving him and ended up not even at the end. I think 10 years later it's like, okay, maybe they've changed. And that's why like at the end of the series I'm like, yeah. But like when she grapples with forgiving him like a few seasons later and she writes him that whole letter and it's like, okay, but you know he's not sorry. You know the kind of guy he is. So why are you expecting him to suddenly see the light?
Yeah. My qualms with him was the fact that he made that entire list about Rachel. Like, that's the thing that stuck out about that was just the fact that he wrote down all of her flaws, like, shared it with the entire group, and then was like, go ahead.
No, sorry. I mean, I think it would have been valid for him to make that list in his head.
Yeah.
And be like, okay, what are the cons of staying with Julie? What are the pros of staying? And then what are the pros and cons of potentially being with Rachel? But the problem with that is that he made it very superficial.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, oh, this could affect our friendship. Oh, this could affect my relationship with my sister. It was, she's just a waitress. She's stupid. Blah, blah, blah. Like,
yeah.
Whereas with Julie, it was all like, oh, she's smart. She's driven. Da, da, da. Like, he basically put Rachel as so far beneath himself that when she finally got a job and started doing what she was like meant to be doing, he got so insecure about Mark and about everyone around her because he acknowledged, at least subconsciously, that everyone else was appreciating her more than he was.
Facts.
And somebody could very well take her away from him. And Ross Geller is toxic character number one, but we've idolized him so much because in the show, we were meant to be rooting for Ross and Rachel and Ross.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this person's not right for Ross, so it must be Rachel. Emily leaves him because he says Rachel's named at the altar. They must be together. They get married in Vegas. They must still love each other. Blah, blah, blah. The list goes on.
Yeah. And just romanticizing everything about their relationship. Yeah.
For sure. And I think if we can move on from Friends, for those of you who like Gossip Girl, Mr. Chuck Bass, I don't even need to know, or I don't even need to say what you all already know. Chuck Bass is absolutely toxic and manipulative. I mean, for hell, he almost raped Jenny Humphrey in the first episode of the series. He sleeps with Blair not a day, not an hour after she breaks up with Nate. And then he blows her off on their plane to Tuscany. And he basically plays games with her head until they finally wind up together. And then he has the gall during a fight to go and sleep with Jenny Humphrey anyway and make Blair feel less than. And then they somehow end up married.
What the hell?
It's a lot. And I'm not even explaining it fully because I'm rewatching Gossip Girl like right now. I've only ever seen it all the way through once. And I'm on season 2 right after he left her like in Tuscany. So I can't really express what happens after that other than what I remember from what I've rewatched now. But like Chuck Bass is a toxic motherfucker. Just his demeanor of I'm Chuck Bass. I can do whatever I want. And I don't like settling down. I like this sick game of playing with girls' hearts and having my girlfriend be in on it. And it makes our sex life better and more enriching and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's a sick game to play.
Yeah.
And that just opens up girls to being okay with cheating or being okay with a man that is like that. Because just because Chuck Bass does have like a remarkable character arc at the end because he really does get his shit together for Blair's sake. But real men don't do that. They don't. 9 times out of 10, if a man is telling you that he's going to change, he's not going to change. Take the Chicken Little story as a warning. Real men, they do not change no matter what they tell you they're going to do.
Yeah. And I think the media is like particularly toxic because they portray this idea of like sex will change a guy or like staying with him will change a guy. And I feel like that just opens like women in general up to like staying in toxic relationships because they feel the same way about that.
Right. It's not even sex will change a guy. It's once a guy has sex,
yeah,
he's invincible.
Yeah.
And then he like finds this one girl that he f***s, and then he's like, oh wow, this is the girl because she was just so good in bed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's whereas like if a girl gives it up, she loses all of her power in the media. Like every ounce of it. So it's just the media portrays like, oh, the man is in a power position and now he can use sex and the fact that he slept with this girl as a manipulation tactic against her to get her to want to be with him.
Yeah.
And it's honestly the same way in a lot of Disney movies and relationships is what we were talking about too. It's not necessarily from a sex perspective, but just from the power perspective of, for example, for those of you who, I'm actually going to go Hannah Montana first. Everyone remembers the whole Jake, Jesse love triangle where we were all thinking Jesse is terrible. Jesse's a piece of crap because he's the bad boy, leather jacket wearing guitar, like the one who was made out to be the toxic guy. And then there's Mr. Pretty Boy actor, Jake, who we're all like, oh my god, I hope she picks Jake because they have a history. That if you look back at Jake and Miley's history, he basically was like, I like you, but I don't like you. I like you, but I'm going to go off and do this movie instead. I like you, but I need to kind of fake date my co-star for this movie just to make sure that, like, I get the publicity. Nothing against you, but I can't be seen with you. And then he has the audacity to go and cheat on her. And yes, Miley has the good sense to leave, but then enter Jesse, and he's exactly what we didn't think he was, which was the sweet, kind, nice guy. So Disney, like, flipped that stereotype of, oh, it's the good guy that's, like, the scumbag. And then it's the bad-looking boy that is good. Which, like, I guess could be the case in a lot of cases, but, like, the fact that they switched that, and I loved Miley and Jesse, don't get me wrong, but when they switched that, it's basically saying, oh, so the bad boy's always going to turn out to be the good one.
Yeah. And it's like teaching girls to kind of pursue that in real life, which isn't necessarily...
Doesn't go along.
Yeah, exactly. Because the bad boys in real life are people who tend to be very selfishly motivated and just kind of want to fuck around and don't really care who gets hurt in the process.
Right. Like, you guys have all seen the TikToks where it's like, oh, girl with a future ahead of her and good grades. And then it's like stoner boy who's like on his last leg of failing out. And it's like they're in a relationship. That's what a bad boy is. And I'm not trying to generalize that all stoners are bad boys and that they're going to drop out or whatever. Like, you know what I mean. Just the kind of vibe of a guy who's got nothing going for him. Again, not being partial to stoners here, but any guy that just, people say, oh, he's not really worth it. If everybody is telling you that, you need to run.
Yeah.
It's like, it's different if like his ex-girlfriend says it or their ex-partner or whoever says it. Or, like, just some of their, like... Actually, no, I'm not even going to say they're friends. If their friends are telling you they're toxic, you need to go.
And the ex-girlfriend, I think you could make a case for her actually being correct, though, because some women are like, you shouldn't date him. He's a toxic person. Like, he did this, this, and this to me. But I can see where you're kind of going with that.
True. I think, though, in a lot of the cases, and I'm speaking from personal experience, not even as a generalization, a lot of cases the ex-girlfriend will make things up just so she can keep him to herself. And that's probably because he's manipulated her into thinking, like, oh, like it's always going to be you no matter who comes along. And I'm saying that not as this perspective of somebody who had that done to them, but the person, like, as the girlfriend who, like, was for a time of that mindset because they had been so heavily manipulated. So I'm speaking from the other side. I'm not trying to generalize against other women.
I get that.
So there's that. And then, like, for Good Luck Charlie fans, you have Spencer cheating on Teddy and then she takes him back. I mean, what the hell? Like, Spencer was the kind of upstanding good guy, but you never take back a cheater, ladies. End of story.
Yeah, they're just going to keep doing it. Like, I'm not even kidding with you.
There is the rare, and I mean 1 in a million man who will change his ways.
Yeah.
But, like, that 1 in a million man, it'll probably be years down the line when they ask for another chance and you say yes, and then they've changed their ways. It's not going to be immediate.
Exactly.
Like, there are a lot of people who, like, will break up in their teens because of cheating and then 10, 12 years later get back together with that person because that person is not the same person.
True.
That didn't happen with Spencer and Teddy. That was 2 years later, and she took him back. Which just perpetuates for girls, here is a toxic trait in men, but, like, they're so in love, so they must, like, have changed their ways by now. They were always meant to be led back to each other. And that's a big, big fault on Disney.
Yeah. I have, like, gripes with Disney in general, but it's more so the fact that a lot of, like, the narratives are kind of, like, they create this, like, positive depiction of, like, heterosexual relationships that don't necessarily, like, translate to reality. Like, I'm talking more about the earlier films like The Little Mermaid or Sleeping Beauty or Snow White, Cinderella. Like, they basically teach women that their goal is to, like, find the perfect guy, and that, you know, after that, like, the narrative sort of finishes. And while, like, in later cases that's been kind of excluded in, like, Frozen or even in, like, Mulan, I would argue that's a little bit of an exception. Like, they kind of set, like, this very clear expectation that being with the man is, like, the ultimate goal, and any other option isn't as valid as getting that male attraction, which statistically isn't really the case. Like, studies have shown that, like, women's life satisfaction decreases after they're married, whereas men's increases along with other, like, variables as well.
And I think Mulan is also an exception in the fact, like, yes, they depicted her as a strong woman, but then they followed it up with Mulan 2, which was all about their engagement and then their marriage. And then after that, they didn't make a Mulan 3. They ended it with her marriage.
Yeah.
So they sullied their own narrative.
Yeah, and Mulan too, I remember the narrative was like, oh, we're having relationship issues and you're the yin to my yang and stuff like that. And it just felt, like, out of place for me.
I remember really liking that movie as a kid because I was really excited for, like, the wedding aspect of it. But, like, looking back on it, I'm like, you could have just left her narrative at the first Mulan.
Yeah, that would have been perfect because...
Would have been perfect.
Yeah. I felt like the first narrative was like more so he fell in love with who she was as a person rather than like, and it didn't really like do the marriage thing. It was more like, oh, she's really cool and like I like spending time with her. And so
Right. And then like in the second movie, it was like, oh, she's not conforming to what I want in a wife.
yeah.
Which I'm like,
That's
that was
fucked
a
up.
big that was a big personality shift, Shane.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck? You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
exactly. Because he's over here like, oh, I love the fact that you're badass. And then in the second one, he's like, I made you my wife. Why aren't you being my wife? You're broken.
Right. Like, you don't want as many kids as I do. You only want 1 or 2. You don't want 12. Like, what the fuck is
I feel
wrong
like
with
that's
you?
an accurate depiction, though, of how men are. Because sometimes you'll see men who just like, they're like, oh, I want a woman who does this, this, and that, and who's ambitious and successful. And then they're like, stay at home with the kids, honey. And you're like, what the f? Like, you're choosing a girl who is ambitious and wants a career, and yet you want her to stay home with the kids?
Right. But then when she does what you say and stops being that ambitious woman, you go chase a younger 25-year-old ambitious woman with no kids.
Yes. Like, what do you want? Yeah.
Exactly.
Crazy.
Like, that's why men cheat. They're like, oh, I married this girl because she was so different when I met her. That's because you told her to stay at home, you fucking moron. Like,
men are just something.
yeah.
We shit on men on this podcast like a lot, but
we do. We should. As the girl with the boyfriend, I shit on men. I mean, in general, like, just fuck men. Fuck them all.
Well, Reed says that too. Reed is under the opinion of like
too.
fuck all men.
Reed's like, as a man, I'm ashamed of him.
We love Reed here, but anyway,
we do. Again, this is a Reed fan page.
This is a Reed fan page. But
it is.
The frustrating thing about that narrative, though, is I feel like marriage is like pushed onto us so much because of the media. Because I'll go to like family reunions, and instead of asking me like, how, like, what is your career going to be like? Or like, how successful do you want to be? They're like, do you have a boyfriend? And I'm like, you literally just need to ask me how I am, woman.
Right. Like, no. Now my, in my family, we don't really share like the whole boyfriend thing. And like my, obviously my mom's side, they know now. My grandma now always asks me how he is. And I'm like, oh, good. But like, now it's my dad's side who is a lot more like judgmental.
About Reed?
But it started about girls having boyfriends. You know what I mean?
Oh, like you have to be married to them. You can't.
Yeah.
Oh.
And it's just like, now they're like, oh, so do you have a boyfriend? And I'm like, and I don't know what to say to them. So I kind of avoid the question. And then my dad was like, oh, they know. And I'm like,
how do they know?
Okay, but why are they asking?
Yeah.
Are they trying to see if I'm lying?
Interesting.
Like just be like, okay, but do you have a boyfriend? And I could be like, yeah, I do. Then my dad's family makes me feel awkward, so I don't tell them. So like, but then I find out they know, and I'm like, great, now they're gonna like say I'm a lying shit, you know?
Yeah, it's like what you're trying to trap me there, like.
Right. It's like as a woman, because I've been taught so much, like in my household, or like that most Middle Eastern families will like judge girls who get boyfriends, like. And have a few boyfriends, you know what I mean? You only tell the family about the boy when you're about to marry them, you know what I mean?
What you mean, yeah.
Like outside of your parents, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, that's why most of my family doesn't know like about my previous endeavors, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Like, it's the opposite for my family. They're like the minute you get a boyfriend, it's like, oh, come sit down on the couch with us and talk to us about your boyfriend. And like, it's how like my entire family, I guess I shouldn't say my entire family, but like parts of my family that don't watch this podcast. But they're like,
you mean all of them?
No, because like I don't want to say any names because I don't want to call anybody out on this podcast. But it's like they don't care about my life unless I have a boyfriend. You know, like you know what I mean? Like they're not interested and they won't talk to me unless it's about relationships. And I'm just like, why do you put so much of your worth into that? Like. Come on.
Right. Like, you need to be your own person and be content on your own before you can even think about being content with somebody else.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, my family's like the same way. They're like, I know my grandma at times would be like, oh, why don't you have a boyfriend? Mm-hmm. Or like, why aren't you getting, not to me, but like to my older cousins who were like in their 20s. Like, oh, when are you getting married? It's like, when I find someone, like, you know what I
Yes.
mean? Like,
Oh my God, that makes me so angry because it's like none of your accomplishments matter unless you're married as a woman, and it's so frustrating.
right.
Yeah.
It is so frustrating. And also, if we're going to go back into characters, I need to mention this one, if we're on this note right now. Edward Cullen.
Oh,
Most toxic mother. Like,
he is toxic.
and I say that because he's like, Bella, like, your virtue. Because there's the whole, like, in the books, like, in the movies, you know, he doesn't want to have sex with her, like, because, like, she's a vampire and he could hurt her and whatever. But, like, in the book, he goes on this whole spiel about, like, no, we should wait to have sex until, like, after we're married, too. Because your virtue, Bella, how could I sully your virtue? And she's like, is this 1922? Like, she's like, this is not 1922, Edward. Like,
Yeah.
me already, you know.
Women do not lose their worth when they lose their virginities. If you think that, then you consider women an object, and you need to stop listening to this podcast right now.
Yeah, if you can't handle this, then like leave, unsubscribe. We don't want
exactly.
No, and Edward's just that way, and then he treats Bella like his property.
He does.
He's like, oh, you're gonna go hang out with Jacob. Be back by this time, or I'm gonna come over to the reservation and risk my own life to look for you because I don't trust Jacob Black with anything. And then it's like Jacob is the same way.
Jacob is toxic,
and I love Jacob. I love Jacob. Love him. And we could go into that. I love him, but only because he wants to keep Bella human. And he's like, Bella, you should be able to live your life and breathe and have kids and do all these things. And I understand. I'm like, that's such a sweet premise. But also, he's so toxic because he just can't accept that Bella doesn't want him.
Yeah, he's just as controlling as Edward in that regard because it's like, it's her choice whether she wants to be a vampire or not. I get his reasoning for it, but it's like, it's her choice. Right. It's her decision. Quit trying to make them for her.
Like, she wants to have the life drained out of her. Her fucking choice.
Exactly.
Like, and that's the difference between Twilight and the Vampire Diaries. Like, yes, people are like, oh my god, Damon is the toxic one. Oh my god, Damon, the leather jacket wearing piece of shit. But at the end of the day, he has always, like, done what's best for Elena. In the sense of, like, actually, I'm gonna take that statement back. Like, there are some times where he can be like, no, Elena's like a big girl, she can handle herself. And then there are other times where he's like, Elena, you don't know what's good for you, so I'm gonna do this thing.
Oh, God.
But it's also like, in those situations, it would have been like she would have died had he not done what he did.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about media, though, is like, they're like, there's a reason for this, but when people do it in real life, it's like, ew. You know, like, Chicken Little putting a bad rating on this podcast, like, trying to control you and thinking like he can quote unquote punish you for exactly,
for cutting him out,
for him being a toxic piece of shit. Like, that's the thing, is like, men too will use the media to their advantage and will use like every excuse in the book just to get what they want, and it's like,
right, ugh. Like, oh, she was a psychopath, you know what I mean? Like, you know how many girls have been branded psychopaths because of men who don't want to admit their own narcissism?
Exactly.
Like, that's normally the case with men who brand their exes psychopaths. Exactly. But there are so many toxic characters, you guys. So many. Did you want to talk about any of you guys?
See, my toxic character, I don't know if they relate because, like, they're not portrayed as, like, someone you should like. So
I guess that's fair.
I mean, I wanted to talk a little bit about like bad boys, but I think we kind of covered that ground. My thing is more like the theory of bad boys, because like I've seen so many like recent films that like hone into this idea of like sad boy, like abusive sad boy, like Hardin from After, or Noah from The Kissing Booth, or like Christian Grey from 50 Shades of Grey.
Oh my god, Noah from The Kissing Booth.
They're like romanticized for abusive behavior. Like Hardin will literally like throw shit and gaslight the hell out of the main character and just like treat her like absolute garbage. But because like she's changed him, and because he's had a sad past, like the behavior is completely excused, and it's like he's trying to like control your life. He doesn't care about you. Like the only time.
Yeah, another thing, ladies, is if they've had a sad past, that sucks for them, and they need to fix that. But that's not up to you.
Exactly. Like you are not there to fix them. You are not a rehab for men. They are going to use that to treat you like And just because they've had a sad past does not mean you are responsible for that and does not excuse their behavior.
Right. Just because they say, I went through this and this and this, and that's why I treat you this way, and you need to let me
exactly.
treat you this
it's way. Like, no.
Like not apologizing for it, saying like, okay, but when you did this, it reminded me of this, so it's really your fault.
That's
like,
abuse right there. Yeah, that's gaslighting.
Yeah.
Because then they're going to use that and they're not going to change their behavior.
Right. Like, there have been certain times when Reed and I have gotten into disagreements, and it's like, okay, well, when I grew up, this is, like, what would happen, so I'm very used to things being handled this way. And it's like, okay, well, I don't appreciate it when you handle it that way. And it's like, okay, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to fix that. There's a difference.
You got to...
between that and being like, oh, that didn't happen. Like, you did this, so I did this.
Yeah, so Hardin's there. And then you have, like, Christian Grey, who's, like, controlling as fuck. Like, does stuff with her even though she hasn't signed her contract. And again, a lot of his behavior is excused under the tragic backstory. And then you have Noah from the Kissing Booth, who...
Fuck Noah! This is a Noah hate page.
I've watched, like, recaps of all of these movies, but, like, there's that scene where he, like, punches someone at the beach party, if I remember correctly.
Is this Kissing Booth
the
2
first
or 1?
one?
I haven't seen 2. I don't remember what happened, like, if he punched someone or not. I think he might have.
I'm not sure, but, like, you can kind of see, like, his aggression, and there's this one scene that I, like, remember when I was, like, sort of watching it where his, like, brother walks in, and he's like, did he hit you, to the main character? And it's kind of, the way that his brother reacts, it kind of shows that, like, abuse has happened before, and that the brother has seen abuse, and it's kind of just, like, it's swept under the rug. And again, this character is like, oh, well, he's so romantic and like he's the one for me, even though like the second character,
they're like, no, exactly. He's
not. I forgot to make it explicit here, but I also don't like the pattern that you see with these men where they notice the woman has a male friend and they'll immediately get defensive, try to control her behavior, and just prevent her from seeing him in general, like, as Sabrina mentioned, Edward does with Jacob. And they always end up being right in the end, which is a trope that really makes me angry because, first of all, it reiterates the notion that men know what's best for women because they're the ones who can see the predators, and so they get to decide who is good enough for her to see. Second of all, men and women can be friends. I don't know why people don't think that that's possible. That just erases the fact that queer people exist, first of all. And second of all, not everyone who is a man and not everyone who is a woman will have attraction towards the other person. I just think that's trying to reinforce... I think that's just trying to push gender roles onto people or some sort of heteronormativity. And third of all, it paints it as this protective behavior when really men like this in real life are controlling and possessive and see women as objects and trophies to show around. But the minute that a man steps over his boundaries, not her boundaries, he immediately is like, she can't make a decision for herself. I have to make that decision for her, and I have to be the one to tell her what to do, and I don't trust her enough to make that. It immediately becomes, I don't trust her enough to make a decision and to keep herself safe. I have to step in and do something about it. And there's a difference between being protective and being possessive and controlling about it, which I should reiterate. But I just wanted to make that explicit here so that the next section of this episode is a bit more clear. Just this controlling behavior and like jealousy and all these other concepts are just like so romanticized, and it's a huge problem.
Absolutely.
But I noticed like a lot of that influenced my own writing. Like when I was younger, I used to write these like really toxic male characters that were like the alpha male and were just like dominating.
Yes. Yep.
So I think it's like you can definitely see where the media influences that.
Right. Like I used to love Twilight, and I used to love specifically the Wolfpack in Twilight. I wasn't just a Team Jacob stan. I was like an entire like Wolfpack stan, and I loved Paul, who was kind of like the hothead of the pack.
Hi, I'm Paul. Sorry, that reminded me of that.
Hi, I'm Paul.
Yeah.
But so I wrote a lot of Paul fan fiction because all the fan fiction that like I read about him was portraying him as this hot-headed piece of shit who would, like, kill for her.
Yeah.
And I wrote that because I was in love with it.
Toxic.
I would just write these dominating, like, There are so many people that I made dominating that weren't supposed to be.
Mm.
Like PETA from the Hunger Games. I think like I had him at one point become like very protective over Katniss in one of my fanfics. Or like George. I did a George and Hermione fanfiction, and I think at one point in my fanfiction he like punched Ron.
Oh my god!
You know what I mean?
I know
like,
exactly what you
George
mean.
Weasley, of all people, should not be toxic.
Yeah.
But it definitely influenced my writing too. Is like, wow, I want to write that because that's something people like and that's something I like. So
yeah, and not taking no for an answer. That was a very big
no
in my writing. I reread that and I'm like, girl, that is not consent right there.
Yeah.
That is very blurry.
I never used to write like lemons or smut or anything. But like I didn't because I was 13 and my parents would read my fanfiction.
No, so I'm not judging you. I'm just laughing because I'm like, oh, I went down that rabbit hole so fast.
Oh, I read it all the time. I didn't write it though.
Yeah.
But like, you know how in those it's like, no, I'm gonna like not take no for an answer, or I'm gonna mark you, or whatever it is. Like if it was like a wolf fanfiction, it'd be like you're gonna get marked. Oh yeah, because that was like a Twilight trope too. Is like the wolves would like mark you. Not that wasn't like a thing in Twilight, but that was very much a thing in Twilight fan fiction. It's like
that was in
when I mark you, you're mine. And it was like when I mark you, like you won't be able to have like a child with anyone else, stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because that was the werewolf books on Wattpad, which are toxic in themselves, but
no, it definitely influences a lot of what people are reading and writing too.
Yeah, looking for that dominating man, and it's like, girl.
Right, and then the girl's always weaker and frail, and she's like, oh, yes, sir, like...
Yeah, and, like, she secretly wants it, quote-unquote, when it's like, that's such a toxic thing to teach men and also to teach women. Like, that men can make those decisions for them and that men know what's best for them. It's like,
and that's why a lot of girls have, like, a submissive complex.
Yeah.
Which is, like, fine if that's something you want to do, but it's like, that's the reason it exists.
Yeah.
So... yeah.
I also wanted to bring up not just toxic men, but also toxic women and how they're portrayed.
Okay.
When a woman sexually assaults a man, it's immediately treated as this joke because there's this notion that men should be able to fend women off, that men are a lot stronger than women, and that men are sexual creatures. So it's treated as like, hey, you're sort of living out the male fantasy, so you couldn't have been assaulted because you automatically enjoy sex. And I feel like the media sort of perpetuates this terrible rhetoric by not putting as much emphasis on the vileness that female rapists have. I remember an analysis done by Kenny J.D. on, I believe it was 50 Shades Free, where they brought in the female villain who was Christian's dom while he was a minor, and had a lot of abusive things that she did to him. Like, I believe she put out cigarettes on his skin. And she's treated as this like soap opera villain where she's not taken seriously. She's more so treated as Anna's competition rather than a real threat to Christian. And I feel like those portrayals in particular are demeaning because, first of all, men feel a lot of guilt when they're sexually assaulted due to the reasons that I mentioned earlier. And second of all, like, nobody should ever be blamed for what happens to them. If they were assaulted, then that's on the other person. That is not on the victim ever. And it just breaks my heart that male sexual assault victims in general are just not treated as seriously as they should be.
Yeah. I'm thinking of something completely different. Yours is definitely a much better example. But I remember, like, I feel like this is one of the only exposures I've ever had to this topic was, like, I used to watch Glee when I was, like, in my early teens, and, like, when the show was not ending, but, like, when, like, the original Glee kids had gone to college and then there were the new kids, like, one of them, Ryder, who is a actual abusive piece of shit in real life, but we won't get onto that. Ryder was, they were opening up about, like, past trauma for whatever reason in this episode, and he had, like, said something about being sexually assaulted by his babysitter when he was younger. Like,
oh God.
Like, he was in the shower and she had, like, came in and, like, touched him or whatever, or I don't remember what it was. And he, like, talked about it and he was, like, shaking and he wasn't doing well when he was, because it's obviously a very traumatic thing to talk about.
Yeah.
And the other guys in the room were like, dude, you lived my dream. Why are you so upset about it? You really scored out. And he just kind of calmed down and was like, huh, yeah. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
He had to put up the wall and be like, huh, yeah, I guess you're right. I never thought of it that way. Like, and then later on in the episode, like, he was like, no, it's not like that. It really, like, screwed me up and I don't feel right about it. And I'm getting very hesitant about relationships and things now because of that. And she is in prison now because thank God I told my mom.
Yeah.
So that was the only exposure to that I had when I was younger, and I can't think of another good one, but you are right that is something that in the media that is very either underportrayed or misrepresented.
Yeah.
More often than not. The media needs to take into account that yes, toxic men that can exist and they're romanticized, but so are toxic women.
Yep, exactly.
And I know that this episode has been a big rant about men, but like also boys, if you have been harmed in any way or if you have felt uncomfortable as the result of something a woman has said or done, we are sorry.
Yeah, it's not okay for her to do that even if she is a woman. And
right. Even if it's somebody that you cared about, if you feel violated by this person, then we are very sorry.
Exactly. And it's like she should not be hitting you because that's another thing that the media sort of it's like, oh, she slapped him, ha ha ha, that's funny. Or it's like, no, that's abuse.
There are some men where it's like when they cheat on you, you have every right to slap them on the face. That's different.
I think it's still abuse though. Like you shouldn't hit people.
I mean, okay, but like when somebody cheats on somebody, I feel like you have every right to slap them in the face. You know what I mean?
Well, would you want a guy to like slap a girl in the face though if like she cheated on him? That's the thing.
No.
Exactly. It's like just don't hit people. Like you have every right to be angry. You have every right to like hate them, but don't abuse them. Don't hit them. Like
that's fair.
I think that's all that I had.
Heavy stuff. Me too. Okay, mates. Well, that is the end of the line from us today. So please subscribe.
Yep. Follow us
leave some reviews. And as long as you're not Chicken Little, leave whatever kind of review you want. Leave a positive review, negative review, anything else.
If you leave a 1-star review, we know you're Chicken Little. So don't do it.
Or you're a part of his army and then we don't like you either.
Exactly. But anyway.
But yeah.
Follow us on our socials.
On our socials at Sabrina Canoon and at
Wolf Silhouette.
And then follow the YouTube, which is the Fangirl Files. And then follow our Twitter, which is at Fangirl Files Pod.
Yeah.
And that's it. Also follow Reed because Reed is a saint.
Oh yeah, the fake. I love his username, Fake Reed Steiner.
Fake Reed Steiner.
That's funny.
This is a Reed fan account.
Yeah, I love how he randomly like posts the same like photo of him but with different backgrounds. I love that he's kept that joke running. It makes me laugh every time I see it. And just like the cringy ass captions too, like where it's like I'm exploring the world right now. I'm like, wow, you're really getting into like the fake Reed stuff too. Like,
oh my god,
it feels like I'm looking at an alien's profile. Who's trying to be
He'll be
Reed
really
Steiner.
happy to hear you say that.
Good.
He will be very, very excited to hear that. He's going to feel very appreciated. But Mans also has a YouTube, which is just his name, so just find him.
Yeah.
Anyway. Reed standing over for the day.
Get the
we
out.
love you.
Oh.
So, yeah.
2 different
we appreciate we appreciate you guys. Maybe if we stop telling you to leave our podcast, then you'll like us a little bit more and give us more views.
No, I it's a good joke, I think. If it is offensive, just let us know. But like, again, we really appreciate you. Even if it is just like 3 of you that listen to our podcast, we love you. You're awesome.
Yeah. All righty.
To that.
Well, all right, guys, get the out of here.